Imagine for a moment you are standing on the coast of Sicily or the southern tip of Italy. But the year isn't 2024. You have been transported back 5.5 million years. You look south, expecting to see the sparkling blue water of the Mediterranean Sea. But instead, you freeze in terror. The water is gone. In front of you is not a sea, but a horrifying white abyss dropping 2 miles straight down. It is a giant, scorching cauldron, a white void stretching as far as the eye can see. This isn't a scene from Mad Max or a post-apocalyptic sci-fi movie. This is the real history of our planet. Millions of years ago, Earth committed the perfect murder. The victim wasn't a dinosaur or a mammoth. It was an entire ocean basin. The Mediterranean Sea, that eternal blue giant we know today, was wiped off the map in a geological blink of an eye, just a few thousand years. But the most terrifying part? We know exactly how it happened. And we know it's going to happen again. How do you drain a sea? It started with a traffic accident on a continental scale. The culprit was Africa. Think of the African tectonic plate as a slow-motion battering ram. For millions of years, it has been grinding northward, smashing into the soft underbelly of Europe. Around modern-day Spain and Morocco, the earth couldn't take the pressure anymore. The bedrock buckled, and mountains were pushed upward. This upheaval began to strangle the Strait of Gibraltar, the only lifeline connecting the Mediterranean to the Atlantic Ocean. It was the door that kept the sea alive. And one terrible day, that door slammed shut. The moment the Atlantic was cut off, a death clock started ticking. You see, the Mediterranean is a parasitic sea. It cannot survive on its own. The sun in this region acts like an aggressive industrial pump, evaporating water much faster than rivers can replace it. Picture a giant bathtub sitting under a scorching heat lamp. Someone turned off the faucet, the Atlantic, but left the drain open. Evaporation. The great rivers, the Nile, the Rhone, the Po, were powerless. The sun sucked trillions of tons of water out of the basin every year. We aren't talking about the sea level dropping a few inches, like climate change warnings today. The water was dropping by yards every single year. The coastline didn't just recede, it sprinted toward the horizon. If ports had existed back then, they would have been left stranded high in the mountains, uselessly hanging over a 2-mile drop. Islands we know today, Corsica, Sardinia, the Balearics, turned into towering mountain peaks rising from a dry, endless wasteland. Sicily fused with the Italian boot. In less than 2,000 years, the water was gone. The sun had won. A lush paradise was transformed into the deepest, hottest hellhole on the planet. What lay at the bottom of this dry basin was stranger than Mars and hotter than Death Valley. It was a chemical apocalypse. When you let a glass of salt water evaporate, you get a pinch of salt. Now, imagine evaporating an entire ocean. The seabed was buried under a layer of salt nearly 2 miles thick. These weren't just salt flats. They were cyclopean salt mountains and plateaus. In some places, the salt crystallized into transparent columns as tall as the Empire State Building. A literal glass forest, baking in the sun. The conditions down there were alien. Remember, the floor of this basin was now roughly 2.5 miles below sea level. The column of air pushing down on you would be crushing. Atmospheric pressure was nearly double what we feel today. The air was thick, dense, and heavy, like soup. This actually changed the physics of the world. A bird flying down there wouldn't need to flap its wings. It could glide as if it were swimming in water, because the air was so dense. But nothing could survive long. The dense winds carried corrosive clouds of salt dust, burning lungs and eyes. And the heat was lethal. The basin acted like a giant pressure cooker, trapping heat. In the summer, temperatures at the bottom hit 176 degrees Fahrenheit, 80 degrees Celsius. The rocks were so hot you could sear a steak on them. Any creature wandering down there without protection would be cooked alive in hours. The most surreal sight, however, was the rivers. Take the Nile. When the sea disappeared, the Nile didn't know where to go. It had to chase the receding water. The river turned into a violent torrent, tearing off the edge of the African continent and plunging into the abyss in a series of waterfalls that dwarf Niagara. It sawed through solid rock, carving a canyon grander than the Grand Canyon. Geologists have actually found this scar, an ancient channel of the Nile buried hundreds of feet below the modern seabed. But the water never reached the center. It evaporated on the sizzling salt flats. In the deepest pits, dead lakes remained. Scientists call them lago mare. But this wasn't water. It was a toxic, oily sludge, super-saturated with magnesium. You couldn't sink in it, but one swallow would kill you instantly. You would think life would avoid this furnace, but nature hates a vacuum. With the water gone, land bridges formed, connecting Africa and Europe. Animals, unaware they were walking into a trap, saw land and started moving. Herds of ancient elephants, mastodons, and hippos began a great and tragic migration. They marched across the salt crust, aiming for the green peaks on the horizon, the mountains that used to be islands like Malta and Crete. The path was paved with skeletons. The salt crust was a minefield. Beneath the hard surface lay caverns of boiling brine. One wrong step, and a multi-ton beast would crash through, dissolving in a chemical pit within minutes. Those that actually made it to the islands faced a crueler fate. When the water eventually returned, they were stranded. Trapped on small islands with limited food, evolution triggered a mechanism called island dwarfism. To survive, the elephants began to shrink. Thousands of years later, Sicily was inhabited by elephants the size of large dogs, less than 3 feet tall. Hippos shrank to the size of pigs. They were the tragic mutants of a geological trap. Ironically, these tiny skeletons sparked one of history's greatest myths. When the ancient Greeks later found these strange skulls in caves, skulls with a large central hole for the trunk, they didn't know what elephants were. They thought the hole was a single, giant eye socket. And so, from the bones of this great drought, the legend of the Cyclops was born. This dry hell lasted for nearly 600,000 years. It seemed the Mediterranean was dead forever. But 5.33 million years ago, the dam broke. The Atlantic Ocean had been gnawing at the rocks of Gibraltar for centuries. It started as a trickle. But water is a force multiplier. The more it flows, the wider it tears the gap. The stream became a river. The river became a roaring jet. And finally, the rock barrier exploded under the pressure of the ocean. This was the Zanclean Flood, the most massive flood in Earth's history. Forget everything you know about waterfalls. Imagine a river of ocean water, miles wide, falling from the height of the clouds, dropping over 3,000 feet straight down. Compared to this, Niagara Falls is a leaky kitchen faucet. Water blasted into the empty basin at a rate of 100 million cubic meters per second. That is 1,000 times more powerful than the Amazon River. The water hit the bottom at speeds rivaling a NASCAR race car, nearly 200 miles per hour. The sound was deafening, heard for hundreds of miles, while the impact of the water against the seabed triggered massive earthquakes. The spray and steam rose so high they created their own weather systems and hurricanes. The sea filled with terrifying speed. The water level rose by 30 feet every single day. Imagine the horror for the animals living on the seabed. You go to sleep in a dry valley, and by morning, the horizon is blocked by a wall of water 5 stories high, racing toward you. Escape was impossible. It swallowed canyons, drowned oases, and overtook even the fastest runners. Computer models today yield shocking results. This gigantic bowl, which took thousands of years to dry out, filled back up to the brim in less than 2 years. Some scientists believe the main event took only a few months. It was a knockout punch to the ecosystem. This sounds like wild science fiction. If no humans were there to see it, how do we know it happened? We didn't find the smoking gun until the 1970s. An American research vessel, the Glomar Challenger, went to the Mediterranean for a routine drilling expedition. They expected to pull up mud and seashells, but when their drill hit a depth of 2 miles, it screeched to a halt against solid rock. When they hauled the sample up to the deck, the geologists were stunned. They were holding gypsum and halite, pure rock salt. These minerals are evaporites. They only form under the sun on dry land. Yet, here they were, buried under miles of ocean water. At first, they thought their navigation was broken. They sailed hundreds of miles away and drilled again. Salt. And again. Salt. Seismic scans confirmed the impossible. Beneath the entire floor of the Mediterranean Sea lies a solid slab of salt nearly 2 miles thick. It is the mummified corpse of the ancient ocean. Later, beneath the Nile Delta, they found the second clue. That massive, sand-filled canyon carved by the river when it fell into the abyss. The story of the Messinian Salinity Crisis, as scientists call it, is a brutal reminder of how fragile our world is. We look at maps and assume oceans are eternal. But all it takes is a tiny shift in the Earth's crust to close one narrow strait, and a blue paradise turns into a white salt desert. And here is the unsettling truth. Africa hasn't stopped. It is still grinding northward, pushing against Europe. Geologists know for a fact, one day the Strait of Gibraltar will close again, and the Mediterranean Sea will vanish for a second time. History is a circle. The only question is, will there be any humans left on Earth to watch the world's greatest sea turn into dust?